Speech Pitch by Iska Sak.
Hi there and welcome back to Speech Pitch by Iska Sak. I'm Spyretta Leivaditi.
I'm Priyanshi Pal.
I am Orchid, Chetia, Phukan.
And I am Sarthak Jain, and we will be your host for this episode.
Today we're very happy to have Jasmina Bakic, who is a scientific researcher and psychologist in psychology practice Hersencentrum in Amsterdam. Welcome to Speech Pitch, Jasmina.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
Thanks, Jasmina. In your work, you mainly use dialectical behavioral therapy, affect phobia therapy, and mindfulness, but also cognitive behavioral therapy and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. You also work extensively with ADHD issues, anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. Would you like to give a short introduction of your specialty for our audience?
Sure. That is never easy, I feel like, to sort of, it always feels like you have to pull an elephant through like a keyhole or something. So I always had interest in psychology, obviously, otherwise I wouldn't study it, but I was one of those geeks that thought it would be really cool in high school to read Freud. And then through Freud, I stumbled on Melanie Klein, and that was pretty much it. I was bought. But then actually I first started from doing research. And my doctorate was on a topic of learning and how different affective states can influence learning, with an idea that, of course, the same chemistry that is behind our capabilities to learn is also behind the feeling depressed, for example, or feeling really good. And learning signals in our brain in ACC are also actually signals that get aroused during states of depression, for example. And so my ideal career, which I still haven't given up, at least on a point of like an idea, is to combine research work and clinical work. I don't think there are that many people that are able to do that. That's a very interesting thing. And actually, the first time I came to Netherlands was for a specific master that was actually built for people that kind of want to inform their clinical practice from research work, and the other way around, that are really in the center of events relating to what happens with clients and what their needs are, so that then you can do research based on that. But so in practice, that there's, I think, a small percentage of people that does it that way. We all know how both of these worlds are very demanding and how difficult it is to do that. And so I also had my wandering around, and I've then also went into something completely different that I tried, and I was a data analyst for a while. And then I found myself thinking, you know what, I've saw this amazing course on DBT, that's what I've done before, and I got, restless fingers, and I was like, I'm just gonna apply. And then I was like, yeah, what are you doing? You have a full-time job. You have so much to learn. You started on this route. And then I was like, yeah, okay, so maybe you have to admit to yourself that clinical work is really something that you really want to do, and that's the reason why you started studying psychology. And so then all of these directions you mentioned, that kind of all slowly starts falling into its place. And it's very nice to dive into all of these different worlds, and they are all a bit different conceptually, but they're also something that connects them. And so also research shows that if you are going to go to a psychologist, actually what matters most for success of therapy is really not the direction. It doesn't matter what kind of therapy, more or less. It doesn't matter what contributes to the success of the treatment, of course, is also a direction. But more than that, that's the connection with the therapist, if you have a click with the person you're working with or not. But so I don't know if that would be interesting. Of course, I can say a little bit about all of these directions, and I don't have to. My personal favorite at this point is AFT. That's what I'm using a lot. It gives me a lot of freedom, and it kind of suits my style, I guess. CBT, again, is something that's like, it's like ABCs of psychologists. Already, like in your first year, you will learn so much about CBT. So that's something we all have to learn. Basically, the basic protocols are always CBT. And then there are all these other things that we can go into, of course, but we don't have to.
Great, thank you so much. Actually, we received a plethora of questions and short stories from our audience. In our episode today, we decided to start with 3 short stories that you can comment and share your thoughts. Afterwards, we will continue with a list of short stories from our audience. Pretty much this is our structure for today. Shall we move on to the stories section, Sarthak? Would you like to read the first question?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So starting off with, a friend of mine drifted into burnout. It is quite hard to witness since my efforts of trying to point out that he overworks and that is harming his health was washed away by him through further anxiety of what else to do if he would not keep working as he does. He's working on a 3-year PhD project whose scope is just impossible to meet for one person alone. But he seems to have gotten caught in the idea that he has to deliver to the fullest. His status becomes so bad, though, that he finally also decided to seek help from a psychologist. But the capacities of the psychologists here in the European country with a public health system are so limited that he only got 2 or 3 introductory sessions at different psychologists, but no one was able to provide him a long term therapy spot. Even though he got diagnosed with a burnout and a related depression, maybe he could get a therapy spot if he would be more insisting, but in his mind, work comes first. So he does not push further for the therapy. So I would like to ask, how could I, as a friend of him, help him further? Trying to push him to really go for therapy and snap out his state of mind has not really been successful for me.
Okay. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I listening along as you're reading. It's in a way a loaded question. There are many things that kind of immediately stayed with me. It really sounds like somebody saying, I work so hard. There's this flame in the question. I would really like to help. And what I've tried so far is obviously advice giving, and that hasn't worked. Of course, a part of this story, which also sort of shone through for me, is how difficult, of course, unfortunately is, and at least in my experience, to get into treatment. And this is something that I find really important to talk about, and that, of course, it's sad, it's a bit annoying, it's frustrating. It's frustrating for me sitting on the other side, knowing that there are people waiting for help, and this is something that we're really confronted with every day. We're also doing screenings, so we also have these lists, so we know how many people sit on those wait lists and for how long. So it's really not out of the ordinary to have to wait for like a year or so. And of course, in a person's life, so many things can change within a year that by the time you actually get to sit in front of somebody that's going to seriously start working with you, you might, of course, hopefully problem has been solved already. But even if it hadn't, I mean, your state of mind and your point of view is completely different than from when you first signed up. And so we know already how much frustration that costs people, and it's really taxing. It's really asking of people to be extremely patient, understanding, have sort of this gallant attitude towards the system, and just say, yeah, of course, I'm paying my health insurance and I'm doing everything that a citizen should do. And then that also, by the way, means that I will be waiting for a really long time. And then something really interesting happens. I usually, once people are in, they're really happy to be in, and then they don't give up their spot so easy. So I'm a little bit curious about what happened here, because apparently this is somebody that got in and then was only offered a few therapy sessions, which, if the diagnosis is true, and then again, so burnout is not an official diagnosis, unfortunately. So basically, treatment is always based on this diagnosis Bible, if you will, that we use in psychological and psychiatrical world, and that's DSM-5. And next to it, there's also another system where indeed burnout diagnosis does exist, but this is unfortunately not an official. So there are 3 different diagnoses that are related to diagnosis of burnout. And so unfortunately also they are actually not support. So if you get one of them, you will not be insured. So you cannot get insured treatment based on that. And so it gets really complicated really easy. And then usually what clinicians have to do is they have to find a midway solution where they will actually give you another diagnosis just to be able to cover you, just to be able to give you treatment. And burnout is not the only diagnosis where we know that this will happen. For example, sometimes people have a problem with giving the diagnosis of personality disorders because there's still a lot of taboo about that and people kind of feel bad. And so then they would, for example, say that's complex trauma because that's really close to each other and somehow it's easier to build into the system and give. So that's also like a discussion, professional discussion, whether that's a good, acceptable solution or it's just a practical solution, sort of good enough. But to put that on the side, I really wonder, it really tickles my fancy. Why did he or she, why did they stop? You know, they were there, they got a diagnosis, so they got a double one, a burnout and a depression, which of course is also, they are very often concomitant, so they go together. If you have been diagnosed with burnout, that's also, it's not so strange to then develop depression on top of that as a secondary diagnosis because of prolonged stress. And so, yeah, that's not something that anyone would expect to be solved in like 1 or 2 sessions, 3, 5 sessions. So I really wonder what happened there and how come they were not able to get a prolonged treatment. And then of course, then the person is left again to fight for it themselves. Then they again have to somehow go in and say, hey, I really want this. And from the rest of the message, it kind of also seems like maybe that's not their style. Maybe that's not really the type of help they really want. And maybe there is also a little bit of resistance to that idea that now I'm going to go to a therapist and they're going to tell me what I need to do and how I need to solve this. And this is also, I can imagine that the same thing that happened with this friend is the same thing that could have potentially, but now I'm completely fantasizing. Of course, I have no idea if this happened or not. But that it was also a little bit of sort of, people can give me advice, but it's something that I just cannot accept right now. And so now I'm slowly coming to the crux of the whole story, and to the maybe what's most striking about it is that this is actually a friend asking for a friend, and you see this motivation, you see his understanding of the problem. It's sort of like the whole thing is just crazy. It's a 3-year PhD project. They're expecting way too much. It was from the beginning set up in a really crazy way where this pressure is immense. And yet my friend doesn't see that. And he just somehow, one way or another, expects of himself to just go on and comply and do what's asked of him. And of course, that's really hard to witness. It's really hard to see the suffering, to see how crazy it is, and not be able to reach through to your friend.
So I would like to ask, are there any warning signs to recognize when burnout is making it harder to seek help effectively?
Yeah, so burnout has 3 most important signs. First of all, you're tired all the time, you don't have any energy, you're exhausted. As a consequence of that, you're not working that well. So you are producing less, you're less motivated, of course, your energy is completely gone. And the third aspect of it is you become very cynical. You start hating your job, you mind all these things, everything is negative. And then of course you don't feel good about your work. And so this is something that's actually, I don't think the problem is in recognition. I think most of us can recognize it within ourselves and within others. But what's interesting about that, I'm going to go back to the story a little bit. What's interesting about it is that person probably sees it themselves, but they cannot do anything about it. And then it's very frustrating for both parties to stay in that loop where I keep telling you, like, why don't you just listen to me? I just want you to sort of stop with this because this is insane and you're ruining yourself and I cannot stand to look at it. And it's very, very hard to accept that the person just isn't listening. They're not budging for whatever reason. They really need to go through this experience. They really think it's not just something that you have to understand logically. It's really something that is your lived experience that for whatever reason, You have to go through this. You have to go through this suffering, and you have to give yourself.
Thank you, Jasmina, for your kind words. Now, I would like to call Priyanshi to move on with the second story.
Thanks, Yasmina. Actually, it was quite insightful with the burnout symptoms. I feel like it's possible that you can confuse it with your lack of motivation to work, or just you being disinterested sometimes, that I don't want to work, and you
Oh
try
my
to find
God,
faults in.
you are so right. You have no idea how right you are. It's so sad when you work with people that deal with that. It almost feels like I have to convince them, listen, you're not lazy. It's so, I don't know, it's something that, and I guess it's exactly the type of people that would indeed choose to go to academic research, that feel so immensely responsible. And that somehow that connection with what I feel from inside has been put in the service of what it looks like from the outside. So I'm mixing my own bodily signals of disinterest and lack of interest and lack of motivation and just being plain tired. And it's really funny because typically these are really hardworking people, really, nitty gritty people that once they start something, they really push through, usually good students, people that are used to sitting long hours and, treading their things and their topics. And so then it's really interesting how easy they are to dismiss themselves and just say, yeah, I'm just being lazy. This is just laziness, and therefore this is unacceptable.
Is there a way to hit the reset button when you are in a burnout and,
There sure is. Yeah, there sure is. Yeah. Luckily, otherwise I wouldn't have a job. That being said, that's not easy. That's a whole process. And there's, of course, a reason why these things are so stubborn. More often than not, what's behind it is like a lifetime script. It's something that's really an identity thing. It's how I see myself and how I live in this world and what do I spend my time on. And so sometimes people really need to hit rock bottom. They really need to go to burnout. They really need to feel this is costing me my health, literally, so that I will be motivated to maybe find another way. And but it absolutely is possible, and I see it every day, and that's actually why I love my job.
Okay, Yasmina. I will now move on with second story from our audience. A friend recently got admitted to a PhD program and found an advisor who had agreed to mentor them. The friend moved to a new country, started their PhD program, but found themselves experiencing severe depression and an inability to work. They can't specifically say how long this phase might last. Their advisor started threatening that if they don't produce research outputs, they will not be able to continue their funding. And keep in mind, this is a person who is still in their first year of PhD and hasn't even completed an entire year. So, such scenarios kind of make you question, how should one go about sharing information about their mental health disorders with their PhD or master's supervisor without making it seem like their workability or competency is impeded indefinitely? And what if sharing that information does more harm than good?
Oh, that's a great question. And unfortunately, very grave one. It would be so nice and easy to say, oh no, of course, go ahead. But I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it go really well and, in a sense, help the person, or how do you say, not a manager, but a thesis promoter, or what's the word? A boss, if you will, really help. That it helped them understand the person better. So then they can understand, okay, why isn't this going any further? Why aren't we productive? Why aren't we successful? And then you see that they can sort of, once they know what's behind it, then they were able to think of solutions, and they were sort of working together rather than working against each other. And I've also seen the exact opposite, where it would really be frowned upon. It would be seen as a sign of weakness. It would be seen as something that will be a long-term problem, and that almost sort of like shouldn't be happening. And of course, if you're already depressed, that's really hard to deal with. You then have to sort of manage expectations around your depression. And that's, of course, very unfortunate, but it is a real option. And so it sounds also a little bit like the person, maybe I'm going to be a bit judgy, but I'm going to allow myself to be a bit judgy. But from the wording, it kind of sounds like the person was saying, my priority is to keep the position. So how do I, if I say there's a high chance, I don't actually expect any understanding. It might be that that's a very real estimation. But then, if you're already depressed, and I understand that getting a PhD, I was in those exact shoes, so I'm never going to say that I understand position perfectly. We're all different. But it kind of sounds familiar. I know how happy I was. I thought that's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I was as if I was in love, and I couldn't wait to start my research line. And I started reading and piling up books, and that summer was one of the best summers of my life. So I get it. It's a thing, right? We really value when we get these positions. And that being said, juggling depression and a PhD where within 1 year you already have all of these high requirements you have to achieve, I'm afraid is not realistic.
Right, but this person kind of just started their PhD according to this story, and it looks like when they moved, they started experiencing this disorder, so to say. Maybe they didn't see it coming, and
Of
they
course
were
they didn't.
in.
No, it's the question more now, and this is something that is universal. We all have this, not just in academia, that we kind of are confronted with the fact that unexpectedly we have to make decisions that we totally didn't see coming. But that it's very interesting to now think a little bit about, hey, what is behind this? Is it the fact that the person just moved and they don't have any support system? Is it the fact that the demands of the new jobs are so high and so immediate from the get-go, from the first moment, that's just putting in immense pressure? And then after already a few months, you can, in combination with the fact that you have your network elsewhere, that can really lead to depression. So indeed, maybe it's not a choice between, am I now gonna let this go to go take care of my mental health, or am I gonna sacrifice my mental health by just pushing through this and going on and maybe trying to finish this first year and get those requirements that I need to be able to continue to get the funding. It could also be that, there's a way to kill both flies in one go, because maybe there's a crux of it. Maybe there's the thing that connects them both, and indeed maybe the reason why PhD is not going is also the reason why I developed depression. So if I am able to solve it, I might be able to go on. But I'm also a bit curious, but if I understood the question correctly, basically it was sort of like, should I talk about this or not?
So in this story, this person did mention about their disorder, and turns out the advisor wasn't supportive enough. And right in the beginning of their PhD, they were expecting them to produce some research outputs, and they couldn't. So they threatened that your funding will be cut off. So they shared it, and the outcome wasn't favorable. So this could be a general scenario for other students as well. So how should they decide that they should discuss this with the PhD supervisor, or how do they go about it?
It's a tricky question. I don't know. I would never dare give one size fit all advice. I do feel like I know a little bit more about the environment and the culture that I am in, and I think they would be very welcoming to knowing these things. And transparency is very much appreciated, and having mental issues, anxiety, depression is not something that's generally seen as something that will cost you your productivity. There's kind of this understanding that you can still work, maybe not immediately, but this doesn't have to be something that's going to be completely a handicap for a person, completely debilitating in the long run. And in that sense, I would say yes. I would always say talk to people. Talk to friends, talk to people from the lab that you can trust, where they can maybe help you estimate a little bit how is your supervisor going to react. But I also think that indeed you have to sort of tread those waters with a lot of caution, because sometimes it can really happen that you are not going to get support and you will not get understanding, and it will really be held against you as a proof that in the long run you will not be productive. Which of course will only make your depression worse.
Right. I especially liked your advice about like talking to fellow lab mates and asking, how do you think my advisor might take it? This also helps you gauge if they think that their advisor could be empathetic or less empathetic. And this brings me to a follow-up question that let's say the advisor or your manager, even in an office setting, let's say it's the case that they're not empathetic enough, and you think the outcome may not be nice. Should you share this information, or what else should you be doing? Should you censor this information, or
I
what
think
do you think?
every major university has a help system. So there should be somebody like a confidant that you could go to that is going to keep this information private, that is not going to talk to your supervisor unless you explicitly ask of them to mediate. And many companies, definitely bigger companies, and I would also be surprised if universities don't have that, actually offer support regarding mental health. So you should also be able to get some coaching, something close to therapy session, or a few, not just one, some support, and being able to really keep this private. And also not having to go to a wait list and wait for a year and get diagnosed. And of course, that's what I think really did become standard in the meantime. That still doesn't mean that's easy and accessible and that you can just walk into an office or send an email and it's all solved. Unfortunately, we know that it takes a little bit more work than that most of the time. And yet, if you're doubting, if you for whatever reason think this just doesn't feel safe, it just doesn't feel like I can now talk to my supervisor openly, then maybe that's a good thing to respect that intuition and maybe just wait it out a little bit to see, okay, what are my reasons for doubting this? Maybe it was just that I was all stressed out and too apprehensive. Might be. Maybe if I'm feeling a bit different, I would see it a bit different. But it also could be that I'm just estimating it right. Very often it is in those high pressure environments with a lot of people that are all about success. It can really be a dog eat dog world where your mental problems will only be interpreted as a weakness, which of course is very outdated and very, yes, we know, and it's still the reality. It's still true. And yeah, unfortunately, that's a little bit of framework we have to work in.
Right. Thank you for your answers, Jasmina. I will now ask Orchid to tell about our last and final story.
So the last and final story is like something from myself only. So it's like, so I'm working on a collaborative project with one of my coworkers. So like, how do I build, like, you can say, effective collaborative relationships with my coworkers? So in my case, I'm working on a similar topic as my friend, but however, he always seems to be unmotivated or he doesn't want to work. But so, and like, I need to push him extra to get more beneficial insights from him. Okay. So as a result, so we now work parallelly with like we see each other rather than collaborative. So how can I encourage my coworkers to be more active in this scenario? Yeah.
I'm so happy you asked in this way, because up till now it was all questions about how do I help somebody else. And this is so nice. Yeah, but I also have doubts and needs, and it's not like it's all roses here. So very nice. And I hope you will interrupt me, you will ask me questions, whatever you feel like is missing. Let's talk about this together. I don't want to like go into a soliloquy. But I mean, it's a real struggle, right? So could use a pal, I could use a collaborator, and then I feel like what I have to do on top of my actual work is kind of drag you along. Come on, let's do something. Let's work on this together. I kind of feel like I have to motivate, or you kind of feel like you have to motivate this colleague. And is it the situation that your success is kind of tied to what he does?
Yeah, you can think something like that, like to get more papers, maybe publications. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Let's not forget that those stories are from the audience, so it's not us, but we read them as they wrote it. So, but I think, but the story is very, very relatable. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, but so again, it's a little bit of a case of how do I do something to somebody else? How do I change somebody else's mental state? How do I sort of somehow do something so that I can motivate him, so that and I don't know that I have an answer. I'm afraid I have to disappoint the person. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it is more a question or something that a coach at work in my first position told me we cannot control how other people work, but we can control how we react to the way they work. So
that was a good quote.
Maybe you, maybe you have something to tell.
Know this really well, know this struggle very intimately, because you would think a child is somebody who completely dependent on their parents. They're somebody who they are really dependent on other for basic needs, and yet you would be amazed how much control and power and autonomy a child has, and they can show that to you very elegantly by using a sock, for example. Or anything can be this push and pull struggle. Eating, going to toilet, learning new habits, going to bed, you name it. You can have this autonomy struggle all the time. And so this applies, of course, to all areas of life and anywhere where you have to deal with another human being. And so, for example, if you have, let's say you have a problem, and then it's a little bit along the lines of what that coach said to you. So you can, of course, solve it. If you can, go right ahead, solve it. If you could just say, hey, why don't you just do this? And the person just picks it up and says, oh, thanks so much. I haven't seen it. It really helped my motivation. Sure, why not? You can always make the problem worse. That's also always an option. And so it's very interesting to think, okay, so what would be the ways to make it worse? I start shouting at the person. I start offending them. I complain. I maybe offer the same solution that didn't work before again, whatever. But I also have the power of regulating myself and seeing what can I do in this situation. So it seems like the person really tried to get in touch with the colleague and try to motivate them, maybe try to explain. But imagine if we would combine the person from the second story and the person from the third story. Imagine if the depressed person, then on top of dealing with the depression, then had a colleague who kept trying to be like, hey, come on, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? It's going to work. It's going to be amazing. We're going to have 10 more publications this year. It's going to be fantastic. And that might be true, that you might be completely on point, and yet this is just not the time. As much as I would love to be your perfect colleague, this is just not the time in my life when I can do that. And so if you really did try to sit them down and talk to them and be like, hey, what's up? Why isn't this working? Don't you like my suggestion, or whatever? Then maybe it's time to stop and turn the paradigm and see, okay, so it would of course be nice if this would be possible, but the reality is this isn't going to happen. And so why does this mean so much to me? And what do I exactly need from them? And what are my losses if this doesn't happen? And can I find an alternative to cut those losses? And if not, what do I need emotionally from myself to come to terms with this?
And when is the right moment to scale it up?
What do you mean by scaling up?
Because scaling it up meaning like talking to one person who's above you to, mediate. Because I guess sometimes, you have different people around you, different personalities, and maybe they don't listen to you because they feel like you don't mean much for them because you're not above them. It's all about like the company's culture and stuff, of course, or the or the university's culture, because we are in both sectors, let's say. When is the right moment to scale it up? The reason I'm asking is because sometimes you really try to reach out, but you find a locked door, and it has nothing to do with the mental health of the person, but more like to their personality or the way they perceive the world. So you feel hopeless and helpless.
Yeah. So the reason why I chose not to be a coach is because I don't like giving advice. I'm not particularly good at it. And I also ultimately don't believe in coaching. And therapy is, in that sense, maybe that's also unfair to coaching. I don't know exactly, but I cannot answer that question in the sense that I can tell you this is the exact moment. Everybody has their own. And the best thing that you can do is actually feel where your own boundaries are and act accordingly. And so some people will have that very fast. And they will say, listen, I sent 2 emails, I didn't get a response. I don't want to come into a situation where my supervisor will ask me, hey, why isn't this done? So this was my task. It's very clearly defined. I'm going to put it up, and what the reason behind it is, I don't need to know. I don't need to, maybe they're completely valid, maybe they're not. But so this is my boundary. And some people are different. They're also going to approach it differently. They're going to maybe be wondering a little bit about it. All sorts of ideas can come up. Hey, why is this happening? Have I asked the question in the wrong way? Did they not understand me? Are they going to try to get into the mind of another person? And so it's also very interesting what happens to us as human beings once we try to do that. More often than not, what will happen is that we will get to a negative conclusion about ourselves. Because that's our fear. Is there something that I have done to contribute to a situation? And so as important and noble that question is, unfortunately, more often than not, it leads to trouble in the sense that then you're bereaved with this feeling of, oh, I've somehow done something to cause this. And so once you're feeling yourself going a little bit crazy with thinking about this, it might be a good time to reach out and ask, hey, is this going to happen? What if not? Why not? Is there something that I could do? And if not, just, of course, it's completely okay and completely normal to sort of make sure that you are yourself protected. And if, let's say, a higher instances have certain expectations about the number of publications that are happening or the task that needs to be done, then, of course, you're just honest and you say, yeah, it didn't happen because there's basically no collaboration. But so, yeah, not everyone will react in the same time, and that's totally fine.
So as a team, like how do you ensure better collaboration and mutual agreement in our research effort? Like, yeah. So any tips for this?
Oh my God, I have so many tips. So I, of course, am surrounded by a bunch of psychologists, and that's another perk of my job, that I'm just working with all these lovely people that are very focused on each other's needs, so we can spend hours and hours just on talking about all these external events, how they influence us. And for example, we make sure that every time we sit together and there's a meeting, we start a meeting by actually doing like a streetlight assessment where we all have to say how we feel. And of course, it's crucial for us. It's because if you're not feeling quite good yourself, then how are you supposed to be caring for others? And so you would kind of get an opportunity to say how you are to a group of people and immediately get feedback. And I think in the rest of the world that are not psychologists and not therapists, it's kind of forgotten how important that is and what a cure that is, to be able to just put in words how you feel and have others hear it and react upon it. And of course, you will not always get exactly what you need. And yet, it's immensely powerful. It's a way of connecting with others. And I think especially in moments where we are not feeling well, it's more important. And unfortunately, and counterintuitively, it's exactly the moment where we're gonna withdraw. Especially if not feeling your 100%, not being productive, not being motivated, being sad, being stressed out, is a bit of a taboo and is seen as something that should be ashamed of or should be a sign of weakness, or whereas actually it's quite normal, and we all experience it many, many times, because energy is not something that is unlimited resource.
You mentioned at some point that maybe it is forgotten how to, let's say, communicate how you feel and your boundaries. But sometimes I also feel that there might be also the case that people don't know or never learned how to do that.
Oh, that's so nice that you say that. Yeah, such an important point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, true. especially
We can go on. It's like more like a comment, not
Yeah.
a question. Yes.
Yeah, especially in a group. It can be, if you're not used to it, if you're not sort of cultured into it from a really early age, it can be very challenging, and you can almost block. And this is also something that we know about emotions. Once you're in it, you cannot also be out of it. So I cannot feel and observe my emotion at the same time. And people that do a lot of meditation also know that. So they don't expect of themselves to be meditative at the moment when they are feeling something. And very often it happens that, you feel something and you have no idea what's going on. And then a day passes by, your chemistry realigns a little bit, you get reset. And then you're like, oh, this is what I've been feeling. And then you can make a story, you can make a narrative out of it. Or not. Sometimes it's also true what you say. Sometimes it's so intense that you say, yeah, I don't know. But the original question was something else and much more important. I feel like I'm a psychologist, and so of course I work with individuals. And I love my job, but the problem of it, I feel like today, is that there's so much attention given to sort of personal development and individual responsibility. And so how can I be better or improve myself or almost be flawless? So sometimes as if people expect of themselves to be flawless. But actually, there's so much to be said about something that cannot happen individually in a session with a psychologist, but something that is really a societal issue. And that's what I love about this question, that it was really asking, okay, how can we support this healthy environment? What can I, as a PG supervisor, as a lab manager, do about this? And there's so much you can do. And so it really doesn't matter if one of your PhD students is somebody who's a little bit alexithemic, or I don't know, it's somebody with a personality disorder that never actually learned to focus on what they feel, and they just feel this bulb of stress in their stomach all the time. That's then their thing, but then they can still feel very welcome to maybe sit there in silence and maybe say very little about how they feel, and yet know that they are welcome there, that if there is a problem, they are invited to share. And maybe then they will start talking about very concrete stuff. Oh, I have this programming issue that I have this bug that I cannot solve. Okay, fine. So that maybe is enough for a person. But if you open that platform where that's okay to do, and not only that it's okay, but it's something that we do every week, then that goes really far. And then, there's so many things you can do. There's so many different things people do. You can be very creative with how you do it.
Thank you for all these great answers, Jasmina. Moving to a short question section for this episode. How can one stay motivated and focused when your supervisor isn't providing the support one needs for his or her research project?
Ooh, tough situation. Yeah, that's really hard. I don't know. What keeps you motivated? I would love to have the person in front of me so that I can ask them. I don't think it's a problem of lack of motivation. It really seems like the person has motivation. It's that motivation is kind of counteracted by this immense pressure of basically being your own supervisor and a PhD student at the same time, and working with no guidance, no supervision, whereas of course we keep forgetting, but PhD people, they're students. They're there to learn. And so having guidance, at least a little bit of it, is really essential. And so I would invite person to maybe look a little bit behind, what really happens. Okay, so I open my computer, I sit down, and then I say, my motivation is gone. And that again sounds like something that's a me problem. So I have to solve that by somehow expecting of myself to have this immense motivation, no matter what the outside world is, and no matter if I'm supported or not. Or, dare I suggest, that maybe a solution is also to maybe turn to the outside and to be like, yeah, maybe this really isn't normal or normative or okay to expect of somebody. I am but a PhD student, and I deserve my time to learn, and I deserve my time to make mistakes, and to have somebody who has more experience who's gonna check this with me every once or so. And if that is not gonna be a supervisor, maybe it can be a postdoc, maybe it can be somebody else, maybe an arrangement could be made. Usually people, universities have an interest in solving these sorts of problems, but somebody has to say, ouch. Somebody has to say, hey guys, by the way, this isn't, I don't know if anybody noticed, but this isn't working. And so sometimes that's really hard to do. And it seems a little bit like then it's almost easier to accept that suffering and to just be like, yeah, so I'm just gonna try and work my best and maybe hope that the supervisor will show up finally. And I'm gonna just sit here and try to somehow motivate myself, where of course what we do know about motivation is being worried, being stressed out. It's a motivation killer. It's really cutting your creative juices. You don't feel that, let's go, let's do it, I want this. For that, you need to feel your stamina. You need to feel that base in yourself. I got this. I need to feel safe so that I can start moving. It's really hard to feel motivated if you're stressed out all the time. And yet somehow, sorry, just one last thing, but somehow we kind of feel that this is not something groundbreaking. We all know that intimately. And yet there's this really irrational, crazy expectation of ourselves. No, I just expect of myself to somehow overcome all of this and just keep on being motivated, which I find really funny and interesting.
So earlier we kind of touched upon the themes of the environment that you may have, what kind of people that you work with, how empathetic or not so empathetic they might be. So the question that is being asked here is, how can one navigate challenges posed by toxic behavior among batchmates in the lab?
Among
batchmates in the lab. It could be your batchmates, it could be your supervisor itself who is being toxic. So how do you navigate this kind of a situation where you're just surrounded by toxic people who are not supportive?
And I guess I'm assuming that if person is asking how do you navigate, that means that they kind of don't know how, that they don't have their own way, or they're at least not satisfied with the way they have. And yeah, then it's important to look at what's missing in the current model. Anything can be a good way. Many people, I think, resort to a mild sort of ignoring / reappraisal, where they say, yeah, this person is toxic. And by now I've built a prediction model, so I know what I can expect. And so I'm adjusting my behavior. I'm disengaging. I'm not gonna expect anything nice of this person, so I don't have to necessarily have contact with them. And then at a certain point, that behavior that probably becomes impossible to do if the person is really so toxic. Again, one thing that I really hope is accessible to people is seeking out for help. If it's something that you can have on paper, if it's something you can prove easily. Usually, again, big systems have ways of dealing with this that are never satisfying. Usually they're very frustrating, and you will never get that satisfaction of, somebody really listened to me. And it's mostly going to be some sort of shuffling of just figures and redistribution and sort of trying to figure out how to maybe redistribute people so that everybody can sort of continue working, but maybe not necessarily be working together. Yet again, that's an important resource, and it might also help to just sort of go out with your grievances and be able to share them with somebody and see what's practically possible. And, it's, as always, the usual suspects. Going outside, talking to people, talking to others, talking to the person themselves, setting out boundaries. That's always the best that you can do. Be very assertive about your boundaries if that's accessible. Then again, of course, and so it's a bit of a broad question, so I have to fantasize a lot. I don't know exactly where the problem is. I don't know what the person tried already. it might be that it's really hard for them to be assertive. And so, of course, then you're a perfect match for somebody who is a toxic person in a work environment. And then, of course, the other part of that is then the inside work. So what does this do with me? How does it trigger me? Why does it trigger me? Why am I not happy with my response? What do I think is missing? Am I talking about this specific situation, or is this something that's a trigger for a whole past where I felt a certain way and I'm actually fighting not to fall into a pattern that's already similar to me? So this is an open conversation. This is something that really needs to be explored in depth. What is it actually that triggers me in this toxicity, and why is it something that is really for me? Why am I the one that's biting that bullet?
I guess the person who asked also has in mind that probably they don't know how to be assertive, or are scared that their words will be taken out of context and create more drama. Because I guess what toxic behavior can be very, like the drama queens, let's say, there are people that they are creating drama, and they're trying to manipulate situations. So in those cases, many people feel like, what I'm gonna do? I want to help the situation. I want to interact in that match, and I have to talk with that person, but I have so many troubles purely communicating with that person. And then they feel, I am in a dead end. Maybe that's the reason that we have this question.
Yeah, so somehow it feels like communication fails, like this person is not going to hear me. And and then my part in all of this is that I'm not so good in being assertive. I'm not really sure how am I assertive, and then also what does that mean for me? And that's really a skill. That's something that really isn't easy. And talking about maybe a generation of, maybe this is like a massive generalization, but I somehow feel that there's something in millennials, let's say, that our education and upbringing really wasn't focused on how do we grow assertive children. And it's a shared concern. It's something that I also I can empathize with. It's a skill that a lot of us are lacking. That's one of the reasons why I love living in Netherlands. They are so good with this. Again, it's a massive generalization, but every time I encounter an example, I'm just like, oh, lovely, how refreshing, how nice. I love that feeling when a person is saying something I don't like, and they're doing it in such a nice way that I can only admire it, and I can only be happy that they're doing it. It's a very interesting thing. And so, like, if this is an assertiveness issue, it's kind of hard for me. It's gonna have a reflection in many aspects of your life, not just with a toxic person, but pretty much anywhere you go. And maybe we can also be a little bit empathetic with ourselves and say, okay, so unfortunately we're a bit late in the game. We haven't learned this so far, and yet this is something that I need to do for myself. And maybe then figure out, okay, who are my assertive people that are assertive in a way that I would maybe like to imitate, and what do I need from inside to feel that I can say this, and then how that's gonna fall on others' ears, that maybe needs to be less of my problem.
I just love what you just said. It's less of my problem, because I have heard that a lot, but they're going to say that, and even if I am direct and assertive, they will find the way to catch and spiral again and create drama again, and then you feel like, oh, I don't want to be in the middle.
And they very much will. And yet there are people out there dealing with narcissists every day and speaking their truths, and believe it or not, stirring and achieving something. And every time you say something, it might seem to you that it didn't have an effect because the person didn't stop their behavior, and yet that isn't true. Maybe it will not have as a strong effect. Very often we have this image of ourselves that we're very small and unprotected against toxic people and toxic environment. That's the thing. That's of course what they do to us. We all of a sudden feel very vulnerable. We feel attacked, and we feel like we have to defend ourselves. And then this other seems very large, seems like my words are not powerful enough. Nothing I say will affect them. And maybe it will not affect them in a sense that they will immediately say, oh, I'm so sorry, now I see the wrongs of my ways and I will stop this behavior immediately. And yet there is this whole dimensionality between them immediately listening and stopping and them using your words to make even a bigger problem. So that's a very fantastic prediction. It's also important to remember that toxic people are only people and also have only limited amounts of energy. And if they would be doing that with every single person they encounter, they don't have the time for that.
No, but I guess also they do it when they find space on the other person's personality. So
Yeah.
I don't believe that they do it to everyone, but they do it to people who they find, I will reuse the same word, like find space enough to reveal their weakness,
of
let's
course,
say.
if you're willing, they will sort of sense how far they can push it and what they can get out of you, and that really is assertiveness training. And there is something to be said about this fear about, they will use my words against me. Part of it is just practical. Part of it is just solving it from the practical point of view. If it's written in words, then that's fantastic, because then you have a solid proof. A part of it is, again, not practical, but more emotional. How do I deal with this fear and the fact that my fear is preventing me from doing something?
Cool. Well, let's move to our next question, because we can go for hours on that topic. I think there are moments when some individuals feel the urge to resign, but are uncertain whether it reflects their true desire to resign or simply it's a cry for help. So when do you know that you are that's the correct thing to do, that resigning is the answer after all?
Yeah, I don't think you can know. I've resigned a couple of times in my life, and to this day I wonder if that was the right decision. It's one of those things. It's a state of being human. I think sometimes in life people would love to just have an answer. So there's a solution and I just have to work hard and I have to kind of figure it out, think hard, invest, and then solution will appear and it will all be solved. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that's not the case. And, it's more about a certain emotional state that I have to bring myself to be able to say, okay, it's not a solution. I'm not solving anything. Everything is still the same. My losses will be my losses. My wins will be my wins. And from a certain place of myself where I can feel my identity and I can feel safe, I can decide that this is right now the best that I can do for myself, and that the losses that I'm going to have are acceptable for me. And they're still losses, they still suck. There's something to be said about bravery of making a mistake. There's a lot of research about that, how very often we have this, in my country of origin, we have this lovely expression that I really love. They say everyone's a general after the battle. So it's very easy to be outside of a problem and be smart about it. But it's very difficult to be in that point where you really feel that loss and you feel that tension and that fear and that anxiety of, I can really make a wrong decision. And then still having to be the one to make it. And then it's also very easy, and this is something that human beings love doing, to give yourself the blame for your past decisions. I shouldn't have done it. Why, we always somehow interpret it from a place of weakness. But the truth is, we are actually as humans really good at making decisions based on the data that we have. The data that we don't have, and we don't always have everything we need to make the best decision. But, compiling cognitions, emotions, intuition, all of that we have as an apparatus that we use. And I, by the way, am completely aware of Kahneman and Tversky and their amazing work. And I know we have we make many fallacies and flaws. That also stands. And yet, there's something to be said about that decision-making process where some mistakes you have to make. And even massive ones like, do I resign or not? If I at a certain point stop believing and stop feeling like I can solve this, I have hope that this will become better. If maybe this and that parameter changes, then the situation will no longer be the same, and I can move on, I can go on, and I can stay. So then I guess people stay. But if that hope dies, if that hope is no longer there, then I guess even though it's a really hard decision to say, yeah, okay, then I have to go, there's a reason for that decision.
Thank you.
So the next question is something like, sometimes when things aren't working out, and one may get into a massive phase of self-doubt, like nothing is working out for them, or if you are capable of anything at all. So if this is a recurring event, so how does one deal with it? So like the self-doubt phase and all, how to get out of it.
Yeah, terrible. Sounds really awful. And yet, I want to say something about self-doubt. That's a really important quality to have. Immensely important. For example, if I wouldn't have my self-doubt, I wouldn't be able to do my job. And I use my self-doubt as an instrument every day. And while I was writing my PhD, I also had it. And I love reading about writers, for example. When you're sitting in front of that blank page, there's this amazing piece, it's really short, that has been written by Ira Glass. And he has written it for his younger colleagues. Of course, this is an immensely creative man. He has achieved so much in his life. And of course, he's intimately familiar with that self-doubt. And so he wrote something like, of course, when you start writing, it sucks. And you know that it sucks. And the reason why you know is because you have that internal critic who has a certain style and a certain knowledge and a certain taste that's already developed. And thank God you have that, because then you say, yeah, okay, I recognize what I delivered. It's not on level of my own criteria. And so the trick isn't to not have that, but the trick is to kind of learn to work with that and to just keep on working in spite of seeing, yeah, this sucks. This really isn't what I wanted. There's also this it's like a little science paper, but it's not a science paper. It's like a little piece. The name is The Importance of Stupidity in Scientific Research.
Oh, wow.
And I distributed this around like crazy because I know a lot of people who really need this. And it's really an earnest look into exactly this problem. So, and how important this is to allow yourself to feel stupid and to be able to endure being stupid for a really, really long time. And so I would also invite a person to maybe, it's really good that they have that inner critic, but then it might also be a trick to kind of learn how to also have an inner supporter, and that these two can have a nice dialogue where you can say, yeah, okay, I made a mistake, but hang on.
Yes.
You know, oh, how difficult for me, how hard I worked, and look, I made a mistake. And that really is hard.
I made a boo-boo.
Yeah. Yeah.
I made a boo-boo.
Yeah, exactly.
It's funny when you say that, because I have the feeling that it is easier to empathize someone else, especially if you feel that you are over criticized by someone else and you hit yourself, oh, how I was like that. But when someone else does the same mistake as you did, it's so easy to empathize, say, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah.
Things happen.
So that's that learned narcissism. My hair stands up when I hear that, because yeah, no, of course it's okay for the rest of the world to make mistakes. Of course, it's fine for you. Oh, you poor thing. It must have been so hard for you, but not for me. Not for me. It's impossible. My self-image cannot stand making this mistake. But so it's very important to keep your self-critic and to maybe listen to them, and at the same time also maybe teach them to talk to us in a way that is also respectful.
Some of the next questions that are to be asked now are quite related to your responses and what Orchid was just asking.
Mm-hmm.
For example, many people associate their self-worth with what they're able to do at work, their skills, and certain people do not feel worthy at all if things aren't going well in their career. So This naturally brings up this question, like, what is a healthy way to have a sense of self-worth and how should one associate it with their life?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm really sorry, but it really on this one world is really working against us, I'm afraid. This is really something that is everywhere. If you look at, well, we're living in a world where people earn money on these stories about individual successes. And of course, these stories are to a large extent fabricated. And they're fully in a purpose of literally selling products because we somehow understood that it's the personality, it's the image, it's the personal touch that sells. And yet it keeps millions and millions of people in this loop of constantly feeling bad about themselves and their achievements and having this sort of very, very broken sense of self. So it's very frustrating for me, and it's something that I encounter very often. I mean, it's our biology, it's everything. So that was a part of my thesis, of course. We know already that mistakes loom larger than successes. A mistake, or an error, it's a scientifically more rigorous term, is a very important signal for us. And our whole system is set up in such a way that we avoid errors. And so we already know from research that, for example, an error needs to be maybe, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and don't quote me on this, like 3 times less strong in intensity for us to learn something, to use it as a learning signal than a reward, because a reward is sort of like, that's nice. But a mistake is something that's really dangerous for me. So I really have to, it's a safety issue. And so there's a biology. There's also something that we are kind of then prone to see negative everywhere we go. Our perception is we're kind of scanning all the time, okay, what can go wrong? And it's very easy to neglect everything that I've done right. And of course, if we're talking about academic world, academic research, it's basically based on the fact that you are going to fail. There will only be a few Nobel Prize winners, and they will be able to do what they've done, not only because of their work, but because of everybody else who have been contributed to the same field, covering all these little bits and pieces, so that we can finally find the one that works. And so that's why it was also a very important movement within publication system to also start publishing null results. Because it's a null result, but it's a very important finding. It's a very important thing to know, okay, guys, the methodology is what counts and not the success. And that's what kids are not taught in schools. It doesn't matter if you succeeded or not. It's the matter what you've done through that. So if I research something thoroughly, and if I really can prove my methodology is super good, there's really no need for anybody else to do this. Look, guys, we've checked time and time again. It has been tried this way, that way. We have a series of studies about this, and we can really put an end to this. We don't have to look at this anymore. We can turn our resources to something else. And so this is maybe like a little parable that can be applied to the rest of our life. But the whole system is sort of tuned to only favor success and to only favor positive things. And of course, then it's really easy to kind of feel like, oh God, do I suck? I haven't achieved anything.
I was just wondering, would you say then it's the fact that we are trying, and if we are honest in our attempts, we can find or place some self-worth in it instead of like thinking of the outcome of it? Or is that not a right way to interpret it?
Well, yes, absolutely. And if I look at my own life, of course, I also love success, and I also feel great when I started having. Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, I'm not bigger Catholic than the Pope. It's a very important developmental experience that you kind of invest an effort into something, and then you see, okay, look, if I do this, then it works. Then I learned something, and then I feel good about myself. I developed a new skill, and then I apply the skill, and I get some positive feedback from the world. Mom and dad say, oh, look, you can read this letter now. Oh, what good. Oh, and then I can use that letter. I can read it here and there, and that's how I develop this very natural feeling of self-worth. And it's very logical. If I invest in something, I will get something back. And then I can choose which kind of things I like investing in, and then these are the things that I will be good at. The trouble starts where we keep expecting of ourselves to somehow magically be proficient or get something positive out of the things that we are not investing in. or also acknowledging the fact that it does happen in life very, very often, that you can invest immensely and that the reward will not be external success. And then, does that then define my self-worth? Also, because we know that people that can be highly successful on paper actually don't feel any different than people that are, let's say, average success.
But also sometimes there are moments that you also don't enjoy your success. You're so worked up to come to the finishing line, and then when you succeed, you're like 2 minutes happy, and then you're like,
okay, on to the next one.
Yeah, up to the next one.
Yeah. It's what Freud calls the secondary benefit of neurosis. That's why neurosis is so difficult to give up, because my own identity is kind of subdued and subjected to this feeling of success. And so I can really learn to completely negate my own needs and put them aside and exhaust myself to achieve anything. But then a part of that game is also that it's never enough. I never actually get that feeling of like, oh, okay, now I feel self-worth and now I feel okay about my state on this earth.
Let's move on. People may have different learning capabilities and pace of doing things. So sometimes it's quite easy to compare your research or work output and accomplishment with your peers and worry that you're not doing as good. So how does one find a balance between a healthy, encouraging competition and maintaining a sense of security and satisfaction with their own pace and output?
So my favorite example for this is Bruce Springsteen. It took him, I think, 7 years to make his first album. And it's the best thing ever. And I think I kind of like to think of that and sort of remind myself anything that's worth your while is going to take a while. And for me, it really fits because I'm also like a long-term person. I'm a long process person. Like I like things that take time. I like that I have the time and, process something. And of course, again, I really feel like this isn't psychology. This isn't psychological problem. It's really the anthropology or sociology. It's this world where, singers have to be very quick with it's, you have to use that wave of fame you have. So you have to come up with a new album every year. And you have to come out with a new collection every half a year. And you have to, whatever it is, you have to have this amazing productivity. Whereas actually, if you think about it, a good research line is something that takes years to develop. We completely forgot about longitudinal studies, for example. Nobody has interest in paying for those, whereas we know methodologically they're the best, purest studies, at least in my field, that you can have. And it's really hard when you are in that machine, when you're thrown into there and you constantly feel like, maybe I have a sense and I have a feeling of my own pace and I have this sort of need to maybe sit down and think about this a little bit before I move on to the next step and allow myself to settle in. And yet there doesn't seem any space for that. And not only that, but I also have to give up feeling good about this. I also have to somehow feel bad that apparently I'm not fast enough.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But again, it also depends also to your environment and how your peers interact with you and how your maybe boss interacts with you.
Yeah. So usually what people love doing to themselves is torture themselves. It's very masochistic. Then they find this one guy, this one person who's just stellar. Just, everybody's favorite, very fast, publishes like 10 papers a year, every year, works like a machine. We all have those examples. And of course, it's so easy to just, torture yourself for not being that person. Be my guest. I guess that's that's obviously a solution. It has its frustrations. To a certain point, it is motivating. It's also very good to have that competitive environment. We all know that we take that energy from each other. It's nice to have somebody successful, and yet it's also good to maybe then try to catch that moment when it turns into its opposite and it stops working as a motivation and starts working as a passivity factor, something that demotivates me, makes me miserable, makes me doesn't want to look at my output. I'm only depressed from it. Nothing that I give is good enough.
So fear of being judged for asking questions, which may be considered stupid by peers, often prevents many students from voicing their doubts altogether. So, like this fear of judgment can be like impede learning or be curious altogether. If a student is in such environment full of peers which aren't supportive at all, so how should they continue to put in efforts to ask questions or be curious and not think about the judgment of others?
Great question. Very important question. Yeah. When I was a student, we had this professor who moved to Australia and lived there, and that's the only environment their kids knew. And then they moved back, and their kids had to go to primary school in my land of origin. And then they started getting really negative feedback from teachers, and teachers were saying like, "What is this? Why don't these kids shut up?" They were really frustrated. Sorry, they kind of put it on the kids, and they were like, they keep asking all these questions. So the learning model was completely different. It was still very traditional. It was expected that a good student is a student who is sitting down with a pen and paper, taking notes, and the teacher is the one who speaks. And if you grew up, and of course the story goes, they packed up their suitcases and they left. My first concern, I guess, when I hear this is try to not judge yourself for not liking being judged. Because it somehow now sounds like, okay, so now it's my job to completely resist this pressure and to, I don't give a thing about being judged. Whereas we're social creatures. We're acutely aware that our very survival depends on if we are accepted by a social group or not. And I've also seen it many, many times in many different contexts how, supervisors would come and they would say, okay, we expect of all of you. Then they would try to like put a measure and they would say, we expect of all of you to ask at least one question every time, and then you would see that it would fail terribly. People would just, those weird silences would fall when you can feel you can cut tension with a knife, and nobody speaks. And if a culture is like that, then it's really hard as an individual to break through that. And I don't think that it's a job of, if you're not a manager, then that's not your job to change. And it's still very noble and very good to maybe change it for yourself. And then you can look at, okay, so how, maybe think back when I did do these things, how did I do them? What did I need? Did I need to be very sure of my lack of, so very often it becomes like a checking behavior. Like, okay, so I need to be 100% sure that nobody knows this is really a flaw in the system, and then I can ask, if there's a chance that this is something that everybody else knows and I'm the only one that doesn't. There's this famous experiment by Ash where they were testing this suggestibility to social cues, where they would draw two lines that were very visibly different length, just very clear, very easy to see. Do you know the experiment? I see you nodding. Yeah. And then they would put people in a circle observing those lines, and then only one person would actually be a participant. Everybody else would be actors. And then everybody would say, no, these lines are the same length. And you could see the photos. It's an old experiment from the 70s. You see these people like leaning and looking to the faces, looking for the social cues in other people's faces, like, what is going on here? And yet a very small percentage of people dares say a different answer than what the group is saying. So this pressure is really immense, and it exists for a reason. And so I guess if you're going to try to break through that, then maybe first acknowledge that what you're asking of yourself is massive. It's literally your every cell in your body is going to say, shut up.
Yeah, so like that was very insightful. Like I would like to ask a follow-up question. Like, so how can I stop people criticizing my progress and process?
I mean, I guess what they mean, like giving us unfruitful feedback.
And what would it feel like to say, thank you so much, but I don't think this is something I can work with?
Well said.
It's really that place inside of you where you can stay in your feeling of a competent adult who has a space in the room, even if somebody is being critical. So it's not about what you will say. We can all think of something to say. It's really about resilience, about being resilient to the fact that sometimes I will be wrong and people will criticize me, and maybe it won't even be about that I'm wrong. Maybe it will be completely futile, but that I have to have this emotional reservoir from which I can allow myself to still feel okay about myself and feel like I deserve to be here, and I don't have to apologize, and I don't have to give up on myself the moment the external world gives me something negative. And of course, I'm not going to pretend for a second that that's something that's easily accessible to people and that that's something you can just do. There's years and years. There's a reason why it's hard being young. It's because you're experiencing these things for the first time. And only with experience, with sort of going through this many, many times, you kind of learn, okay, I have my good sides, I have my bad sides. I made many, many mistakes. I've also corrected my mistakes many times. And then it becomes a bit easier to carry other people's criticism. I also don't believe people that behave like they're completely immune to this.
An interesting question. So it is something like this, like how to deal with your work environment. Like, so it can be something where no matter what you do or how much effort you put, sometimes nothing is enough, right? Or doing that like very much also is not enough for that kind of work environment. How to deal with it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little bit along the same lines. I feel like all of these people are really struggling with being overworked, with having these super high demands and not being able to find a way to deal with that. Again, I wonder if there are good models in the environment. Very often, they're also not. Very often you see these overworked people that are snappy and constantly at the point of burnout, and that externalize and push their frustration onto others. And, they're just snapping. They work unhealthy amounts of hours. And very often that's what's offered as a model. And it's also kind of imposed on you. So this is how we do things. I don't know how many times I have been also told in my academic career, this is not an ordinary job. To sort of, I see some smiles of recognition. To somehow justify the fact that you're actually sort of asking free labor. Yeah. Again, all the luck to you. It's not an easy task. What I would like to offer is that it's not a solution that you always have to adjust and that you have to accommodate to all these needs. Sometimes we really don't have a choice. If we're an immigrant student whose documents depend on an employer who dictates all the conditions of our life, it becomes very stressful very easy. It's not something that you can just, even if you're the most assertive, most, composed, in tune person ever, it's still not something that's easy to navigate. And yet it's very important to maybe keep in mind that it's very healthy to say, look, I think this is not going to work. I'm having my doubts. How do you think this will be achievable? How much time should we look at it together? How much time do you think this will cost? If I look at what I do in a week, this is how much I can achieve. And if you approach it with a certain openness, maybe, and that also, by the way, means you have to acknowledge you are vulnerable. You have limitations. You cannot work forever. You don't want to work forever. Most of people who aren't psychopaths are going to find some way to hear you out.
The way you said about, being overworked and all that, and being scared to, open up. Sometimes also people feel like they are going to be judged as difficult to work with. So I guess that's like an educative guess, because, of course, the questions are not mine. But I can relate with different people I have talked in general in my life with my friends about our working environments. So yeah, let's move to the next questions. Well, the next questions are, going to touch a very sensitive topic. It is the topic of self-harm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we reached that point. How can someone spot an employee or a student in a challenging mental state that could put their life in danger?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Very carefully and with a lot of respect and a lot of sense for how delicate it is. And I guess the most important thing is try not to approach it from a point of criticism. Obviously. maybe a bit obvious. And another very important point is I feel like these topics are very often taboo topics. So very often people feel like talking about suicide, about self-harm is something that's hard to mention because you're afraid you're going to hurt the person. And what we know from clinical practice is that it actually, people that struggle with these things actually are very thankful if you mention it in a candid way, if it really comes from a place of I'm concerned for you. Because it's when you're in that position, you're very vulnerable and you're very alone. It's very isolating. You feel like everybody's judging you. You feel like nobody will understand. And it is a very specific mindset that you fall into. It's a very specific thing. Think about it. Somebody doesn't have any other solution and they cannot find another way to release the tension rather than doing it really very concretely on their own skin. And that works in a moment, and then the loop begins. And so it's very easy. It's much easier if somebody else does it for you. If somebody else says, hey, did I maybe notice this correctly? And is this something that I would like to mention? If you want to talk about this, I am here, and maybe also not directly, and maybe you don't have to spill the beans. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me, but I just want to know if you would need help, if you would be open to talking about this. And then they're a little bit less alone, then they're a little bit less isolated. It kind of becomes this thing we can talk about. You know, it's a topic like any other. And people that abuse alcohol as a coping strategy also feel immense shame about abusing alcohol, and yet they learn how to talk about it. In principle, anything should be a conversation topic.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's you just said that in a way that actually the employer or supervisor is not crossing the line. It's just actually trying to help. And
sorry, just don't forget your question. But a very important disclosure: if you are a supervisor, then you also have to be cognizant of the fact that you are now kind of playing a double role. And maybe you have to acknowledge the fact that you're doing something you're not aware that that's not possible from your role. So you being a supervisor offering to ask or talk about self-harm, even if you're coming from the best of places with the fullest understanding, if your relationship with the student is not that way, then you have to offer something else. So they don't maybe have to talk to you, but you have to provide safe environment where they can talk to somebody else.
No, actually, you literally moved to my next question, which was how we can persuade them to search for help, because of course it's not their position to help. Mm-hmm. They can play a role on that, and of course maybe it's something that the situation, like the environment, mm-hmm. is creating to the employee or the student, and maybe like the supervisor can twig things around, and of course support in the university or in the working environment the person, but of course that person should see a specialist. So
yeah, so be very discreet. Don't talk about, because usually there's a massive stigma on this, and people are going to feel, before they can hear your message, they will first feel immense shame. So be very discreet and very careful about how you offer help, and maybe talk about more from the point of, hey, you know, work is hard, PhD is hard. I feel that you can struggle. You maybe have some pressure, and here is you can talk to me, of course, as your supervisor, and then also you have to be ready to maybe give up a little bit of that pressure. because otherwise it's very hypocritical. If you're going to offer help, then maybe try to do what you can do within your region of power. So see, okay, can we divide the tasks? Can we maybe put something from, can I give up some of my expectations towards these students? So maybe I can already help by showing I'm listening. I don't have to talk about you cutting, even though I noticed it. I can maybe talk about, okay, I want to work with you. I saw it and I got the message, and I'm going to do what's mine to protect you. So maybe you are somebody who cannot ask for this themselves because you really expect of yourself to do everything. And yet we both notice this is too much. So what can I do to maybe take off a part of the pressure? And maybe I'm not going to expect of you to write 3 papers, but I'm going to be okay if you write 1. And so then I also have to come from a place of honesty. So not sort of, yeah, you're cutting, go solve that. It's obstructive to our productivity, but be genuine about the help you're offering.
Cool. Great. Actually, great answer. But I'm gonna go darker. After an unfortunate event, how can an employer or supervisor deal with the grief?
And I guess the question refers to a lab setting or like a communal setting, a group setting.
No, like meaning the supervisor had a student, and that student decided not to be with us anymore. Mm-hmm. So how the supervisor or the employer can deal with the grief, because of course it will affect their working life, their personal life, what they have done, what they could do better. And of course the working life is very active, and they have to wrap things up and put that in somewhere and continue life and continue producing. But they are still grieving because they may feel guilty, they may feel bad, sad, many things that I don't know right now. But yeah, how they should, of course they should search for help, but yeah, I don't know how to elaborate better the question.
But it seems like I kind of don't like the question, in a sense that maybe I interpreted it as sort of, how do I juggle my grief and expectations of my life? It's as if my life expects of me to kind of continue as if nothing happened. So I still have all of these things that I have to do, but at the same time I'm grieving. Whereas grief is such an important part of our life. It's one of those things like sadness, for example. It's creative, it's warm, it's necessary, it's something that connects us. It's something that, from going through that grief, you can really experience so much that you will maybe be, not that it has to be productive or not that it has to be functional, but the function of grief is actually to sort of help you understand what's the loss, what did I lose, and how do I move on in life. And I guess the most natural, most normal thing in life is to leave space for that. So it's bad enough when the environment is putting this pressure on you, but this question almost sounds like the person themselves is putting the pressure. Sort of, how do I put my grief aside so that I can, how do I juggle, can I schedule in being grieving after 5?
I don't think that it was more like putting the grief away as like
you don't put
I
it
have
away.
to balance the grief with the grief, because
No.
I still need to keep.
Yeah, I do, and I cry, I go to work, and everybody sees that I'm sad, and then we take a moment in the hallway, and I'm 5 minutes too late, or 10 or 15 or 20. I was supposed to be writing already, and now I'm 20 minutes behind, but I stood at the hallway midway to my office, and I shed a tear with a colleague, and we talked a little bit, and then I distract myself and it doesn't work, and then I really allow myself to really go through that and not be as productive, and not feel the guilt for that, but maybe focus on the guilt around the loss and what it does to me, and not just put it aside, another function of my productivity. but really take it as something that's the only normal, logical thing. We cannot expect of ourselves to always be as productive. And also have this really unrealistic idea that will all cost us something, that if we don't do this, career will flop, it won't be okay, yeah? There will be this massive consequence. I don't think that's true.
Thank you. No, that's important. That's important in general, grief, but I know we put it in a very specific scenario. But I think your message here is that it is natural and it is okay to grieve, and it's okay to take time to grieve.
Not only that it's okay, but if you, it's gonna come and bite you in the ass.
Okay, let's move on to a different question, which is circling about ADHD. So, this is specific to ADHD in work or school environment. It's more about us knowing what could ADHD look like in an adult. So, what does it mean? What could be the symptoms like? And there are also instances where people choose to self-diagnose or choose some online tests, which may or may not really reflect the true state of the person. So, how do you recommend people should get diagnosed about it? And are there any telltale signs that can be identified by ourselves about ADHD?
Yeah. So the problem with ADHD diagnosis is that there's a standard in care, and there are certain instruments that we're using. One of them is particularly popular, and my personal conviction is that if I would give it to 100 people, I think 99 people would find themselves in it. So it's something that's supposed to be a neurobiological disorder. So it's something you are born with, or you acquired it quickly after birth. And yet it's very hard. So for example, we don't have neurological correlates. There are many studies, and most of them find certain qualities, certain differences, let's say, to a normative population, but only on a population level. So it's really hard to read the scan of people. Even if you would, for example, give attention tests or memory tests, it's very hard to grasp the essence of what it is. And of course, the best thing that you can do is go to a professional, and they can administer a full set of tests, and they can make a clinical decision. You can do these screeners online that can maybe give you a little bit of indication, sort of, is this worth my time? And then, what people usually consider being ADHD's, and what's also in the diagnosis is problem concentrating, not being very impulsive, so not being able to control your impulses, sort of having to react first and then regretting it, or not knowing what you want to say and hearing yourself speak. Being very easily distracted, so being very sensitive to extra stimulation, to any sort of not having, our attention is kind of like a flashlight, and we all have that ability to sort of choose where we want to focus our flashlight on. And with ADHD, it's kind of as if you don't have that ability, as if it's completely outside of your control. So in order to get the diagnosis, one of the requirements, of course, is that it has to be there your entire life. So it has to be something that was there at the beginning. And so if you come in as an adult, and especially if you come in as a woman, it can be notoriously difficult to diagnose. Also because women are kind of taught to inhibit much more than men. For better or worse, both situations have advantages and disadvantages. And so basically, I have encountered in my practice all possible scenarios. I've encountered situations where people have been given this diagnosis and have gotten nothing from it. And so if it's very interesting, and the other way around, that it hasn't been seen for many years, and then all of a sudden they get paired up with a psychiatrist who gives them medication. It's a very simple treatment that's basically based on structure, on sort of learning how to live with this disability. But what I find very interesting about this diagnosis is that it's becoming very popular, and it's kind of very interesting for me. It almost feels like it's abolition of sorts. Like people are kind of feeling there's something wrong with me because I'm not as productive. I cannot as focus as well as I either used to, or as I assume others would focus. And then either they go to autism, or they go to ADHD. In the 90s, the BPD was all the rage. Everybody wanted to have BPD. It was a very popular diagnosis. And now it's ADHD autism. And so maybe more important than diagnosis itself, it's very important what you're going to get from it. How is your life going to be different? If you get ADHD diagnosis, then you also have to acknowledge that maybe you cannot expect of yourself as much or in the same direction. ADHD are very good. People are very good in being very creative. They can think on the spot. They can have these sort of from that impulsivity. That doesn't mean that they cannot think. So they can really achieve amazing things in business, in getting others to move, in being very productive, but maybe not in a sense of like sitting down and reading through a whole bunch of text and getting information out of that. That's probably not going to be your thing. And so getting a diagnosis might actually mean that you then have to change course and maybe acknowledge, okay, some of the things are never going to be accessible to me. But I guess first step is go see a psychologist, somebody who could diagnose you.
So other than a psychologist or psychiatrist, can you actually go to another, like to a doctor? Is there anything physical
No.
that can be measured and say,
No,
okay,
no, it would be
it's purely behavior?
Well, it's basically a history of symptoms that they have to take, and then of course differential diagnostics is very important. So for example, if I would have to, and I'm not going to do that because I would be a very bad psychologist, but if I would have to imagine if any of the people from our previous questions had ADHD, I would say no. I would first then go and make sure that I check everything related to the amount of stress, to depression, to coping styles, to trauma maybe, and all of that would be included in my battery before I would be able to say and assess with a certain certainty, and of course we never have 100% certainty, this is ADHD.
Cool. Thank you. So actually we reached to the end of today's episode. Is there something you wish our audience would take home?
We talked a lot about stress. Maybe a take-home message would be, and this is like such a typical psychologist answer, and yet I'm gonna stick to it, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, that's a really good one, to be honest.
Thank you.
No, I mean, I can see myself there, and I can
Oldie
see
but
and
goldie.
coming. Sorry,
It's
what?
oldie but goldie.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jasmina. It was interesting, informative, and quite different from our regular episodes. Really, really thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Really enjoyed your answers and loved this discussion. Yeah. Thanks a lot for listening to this episode on mental health. Stay tuned for future episodes of Speech Pitch as we might interview your favorite speech researchers and entrepreneurs. Also, don't forget to subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast, and also follow the ISKA on X and LinkedIn, where we share our latest news with you.
Speech pitch by Iska Sak.